Kia ora koutou. Welcome to the first edition of the new podcast series from Water New Zealand. Tāwara o Te Wai, Water Talk. I'm Gillian Blythe. I'm the Chief Executive at Water New Zealand. Our organisation represents the people and organisations that manage the three waters: drinking water, wastewater and stormwater. Ka ora te wai, ka ora te whenua, ka ora na tangata. If the water is healthy, the land is healthy and the people are healthy. That is at the heart of all our work. So throughout our podcast series, we intend to focus on key water issues: our infrastructure, the workforce, water quality, Te Mana o Te Wai, and much more. Today, it's World Water Day 2022. And this year's theme is groundwater, the invisible, often forgotten about, but critical part of the water cycle. Throughout the world, as well as here in Aotearoa, groundwater is under stress from overuse and human activities on the land. Recently, I spoke to three groundwater experts: Louise Weaver, Science Leader, Environmental Microbiology at ESR, Jeff Williams, who's a Senior Strategy Advisor at Wellington Water, and for an international perspective, Koos Verix from the Netherlands. Koos is chair of the governing board of the United Nations International Groundwater Resources Assessment Centre, which is based in the Netherlands. I began by asking Louise just how much stress we've been putting on our groundwater here.
I think we've been putting a lot of stress on our groundwater in New Zealand, partly because we've had this sort of thought that we've got an unlimited amount of water available to us in our groundwater, and so we've been quite liberal in our use of it, both in agriculture but also in drinking water side of things as well. So yeah, I think we've put it under quite a lot of stress, and there's that unseen part of it as well, that we think, oh yeah, everything's fine because we're still getting water, we have lots of it, it seems to be pretty clean, so everything's tickety-boo.
And so just hearing you talk about the unseen part, because so much of water as the whole water sector is unseen, but particularly for groundwater, what does it mean to be unseen in the groundwater context?
I think that when we're thinking about things underground, there's been a bit of perception that it's quite a sterile environment, and so it's a bit of a black box. We don't really know what is happening underground. But then on the other hand, we know at the other end, we get drinking water that's, on the whole, good to drink, and it's safe to drink and good for our agricultural practices as well. So it's that unseen and uncertainty around it. We do know more now than we did, say, 50 years ago, but we still know so little about what happens in our groundwater. And that's a global thing as well. So there's more realization on a global platform that we need to know more about our groundwater and the processes that occur underground, how much water, where is it flowing, etc., in order to protect that precious resource.
And so to be able to have that understanding, is there a particular mapping that we've got to do, or modelling, or how do we find out what's down there?
I think this is where it's a multiple approach that we need to do. We need to do more visualization tools, so that includes more modelling, more mapping. But in order to do that in a better way, we need more data, basically. So we need to know more about all the way from the geological structure that's present there, how the water will pass through particular components of our aquifer systems, so that's our groundwater systems, but also the biology that's present there as well. To my mind, that's very important, because it's the biological aspects that are most likely going to be removing a lot of our contaminants. There is some filtration that occurs in physical removal, but a lot of it is a biological action as well.
Because I guess many people would think about the biological being what's happening above ground in terms of what might seep down. But what you're saying is that there's a huge part is what's in the earth, and what's the structures of the geology makes a huge impact.
Yeah, that's right. Because that's where it comes to groundwater being quite a pivotal point in our water cycle, that it slows the water down and allows these processes to occur. So as the water squeezes through the aquifer, it gives chance for those microorganisms or higher organisms in some of the situation that you might have present to remove those contaminants further. So we need to be able to keep that going on. And at the moment, the problem that we have is that normally in the situation, the groundwater flow would be slowed down to allow those processes to occur. But if we allow things like over abstraction to occur, then we're pulling the water through essentially. So those processes might not have time to undertake that important role.
Are there certain types of geological formations where having more over abstraction makes it worse?
Well, it's a difficult one. I'm not sure that I could answer that it makes it worse or better, because wherever you're going to take it from, it's going to have an impact on your groundwater. You know, if you pull it out too quickly, whether it's from an open framework system or whether it's from a sand system, it's still going to have detrimental effects. In terms of if we over abstract in areas where we do have more open framework, we have that issue as well, another issue of subsidence, which can be an important factor as well for people to think about as well, that if they're taking too much water out of that water, then there is a space there.
Yes.
And there's going to be pressure.
Yeah. So are there bits, you know, places in New Zealand when they're under more stress than others? Is that possible to know?
Some areas are under more stress already, and it's not just through over abstraction, but you know, coastal environments as well, because I know that we're going to talk later about climate change, but there is those stresses as well that are coming on board over on the east coast of the North Island, and around more rural areas in the Gisborne region. They've already got issues with their groundwater supply through over abstraction, but then they've also got saline intrusion coming in areas in the North Island. There's already issues and concerns about subsidence, etc., through over allocation. In Canterbury region, we've got huge allocation allowance for agriculture, which is already putting a stress on our environment as well. So I think across all of New Zealand, we can see examples of where we're perhaps taking too much water or not thinking about the longer term effects or the outside the box effects, as it were, on the water.
Yes, I think the sort of thinking about what happens, you know, above ground. I mean, there's been various, you know, international discussion around sort of forever chemicals, you know, the PFAS and the impact that might have. That's an area which I suspect for many people is an unknown.
Yeah, there's and that's only one of them. There's lots and lots of issues that we need to think about in terms of the emerging contaminants that could be coming through, and the more that we look, the more we seem to find. I know that recently colleague at ESR, Murray Close, did another survey of his pesticide survey, but he also started looking at emerging organic contaminants, and in all the samples that they found, there were low levels, but they found a whole suite of organic contaminants. So I think it's a big issue that's on the horizon as well. When
you do the sampling, because sometimes it's a point source when the contaminants might enter the groundwater. So with those sorts of surveys, are they is the sampling done close to the point source, or is it, you know, how far away could it possibly impact? It
varies. So a lot of the work that we do in the groundwater space, because we don't have the luxury of being able to just take a sample anywhere, we have to go to a bore or a well that is already there, or we have to drill one. We do only get I'd say it's like a snapshot of what's present in that system, and then we have to extrapolate back as to where is the likely source of this coming from. We do know with the emerging contaminants, it's most likely going to be septic tank systems, wastewater systems, you know, and we can see that in a local area of where they're going to be playing a part in that. Or in terms of the pesticides, it's in an agricultural area anyway, so we know that that's going to play a role. But it's quite difficult for some of the contaminants to be able to pinpoint that source, because of the fact that you can't just go, you know, in a river, you can go and sample all the way along the river if you wanted to, but with the groundwater environment, we can't do that. So we do have to, that's where the modelling comes back in as well, that we have to try and extrapolate what data we've got from our sampling that we've taken at a particular point in time, or looking historically back at our records, and then being able to look in that on the land surface of what activities are occurring.
And so I get one of the things you're saying is that we need the data from the bores, but we also need to have the data around the potential sources of contaminants. And so, you know, local septic tank data, effluent management systems data is something that's a really critical part of understanding this going forward.
Yeah, that's it. And even things like, you know, rainfall information as well, of how quickly is the likely source going to come through into the groundwater, the depth to groundwater. There's lots and lots that need to be pulled into that picture when you're trying to build that 3 or 4 or 5D model of what you've got in your particular catchment.
Yeah, just thinking when you said about rainwater and thinking about climate change and thinking about how we can have, you know, you can go from having you know, far more intense rainfall events and how that might impact groundwater full stop, but groundwater and contaminants and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we are looking at as well, because in terms of when we want to recharge groundwater environments, we like to have quite nice gentle rain, as it were, nice soft gentle rain that can distill through, go through the soil down into the aquifer, whereas a lot of the times now we're having this really heavy rainfall, often after a really dry period. What's happening is that we're just getting overland flow, so it's not getting the chance to get into the groundwater per se, or not effectively. And then if it does, it's bringing it in with a lot of contaminants that wouldn't necessarily normally happen, because again, it's all that thing of the time it takes. So if you have gentle rainfall, even if you have contaminants, they tend to get caught up in the soil there, so there's time for them to be removed. Whereas with a heavy flood event, that's sort of taken away, and then you get that overland flow as well. So less goes into the groundwater, and then what does get in gets forced in with the contaminants. So it's a bit of a double whammy, but it is something that we need to be aware of, that this could be, and it seems to be occurring more and more often.
So if we get for those events when we've had the intense rainfall and we've got big floods, is that going to mean that, you know, as we look forward and we see climate change impacting us, that it's going to have a potentially negative impact on our groundwater sources?
It could do, but it could be, because that's again the thing with groundwater, is that we tend to be looking back in time when we're looking at our groundwater, when we're thinking at it at our tap, when we're drinking it. That water has been in the ground. We know that it's got to be over a year at least, but you know, it could be tens of years, 100 years, etc. So we're looking back in time. So we need to be thinking whatever we're going to put into our groundwater now is going to affect our children's generation or further down the track. So it's quite difficult to think about those sorts of contaminant issues, that it's not immediate, but we could also see an immediate effect in terms of if we're also coupling that with over allocation and we're drawing groundwater through, then it is moving a lot faster. But if that doesn't occur, then yet there is more time. But in some ways, what comes in is going to come out of the groundwater at some stage, which we're seeing at the moment with nitrate levels, aren't we? With that increase in nitrate levels. It's not what we're putting in now, it's what we're putting in 20, 30, 40 years ago. So,
and I think it's quite a hard thing for everybody to get their heads around, you know, because you know, if you're making a decision to do something today, you're thinking about it impacting, you know, your business, your ability to grow your crops, you know, to be able to have a higher milk yield, all of those sorts of things. But what you're saying for groundwater, it's what, you know, your forefathers did, or what you did at the start of your career as a that is impacting what's happening, you know, today in terms of the drinking water, you know, the groundwater that we can then drink.
Yeah, that's right. And it's then and trying to have that sort of thought as well, of that you're trying to protect it for your generations to come as well, that they also have good water source.
Absolutely. I think in terms of some of the conversations that we're beginning to have around Te Mana o Te Wai is perhaps going to encourage us all to be able to think about what went before and what's going to come after in the conversation around water.
Yeah, I think that's what's been really, it's been quite exciting for me, and seeing that we're all going to have to uphold Te Mana o Te Wai, because it does really have that more holistic view, and that view of looking into the future. It's not just an immediate impact and effect, but it's having more of a viewpoint on water has a right to itself, and we should be upholding the water itself, but also the environment that we live in. If we keep the environment healthy and happy, then we're going to be healthy and happy. And I really like that sort of thought. And it's also really encouraging for me in terms of, if we're upholding Te Mana o Te Wai correctly, we're also going to be engaging with each other. We're not going to be doing our own little thing. So we're not going to be compartmentalizing the way that we look at water. We all have a part to play. So from the farmers all the way up to, regulators, etc., scientists like myself have a part to play in keeping our water safe.
Absolutely, totally agree. I think the one of the Water New Zealand's purpose in terms of ka ora te wai, ka ora te whenua, ka ora ngā tangata, if the water is healthy, the land is healthy, the people are healthy, is a great sort of, if I can say, bedrock, for us to be thinking about what is, the water cycle and what does it mean. Because, listening to you today in terms of what you've said about groundwater, it becomes, crystal clear, doesn't it, really? So just going back to the conversation which you touched on briefly around climate change and the potential for saltwater impacts, are you able to elaborate a bit more?
We could potentially get more saline intrusion impacts, both in terms of, if we are on the coastal environment, we're going to end up, if we take too much water out, there's a bit of a balance to play there. It allows more saline water to come in, and because it's naturally lighter, and tends to sit on top of our groundwater sources. So that's going to play a big part in, if we have a well, we might find that it suddenly becomes salty, and so we can no longer use it for drinking water. But it also does play a role in, then if you're using that water to put onto your land, you're putting more and more saline water onto the land, and so it has that knock-on effect. It's potentially not going to be very good for your crops or from your animals that you're having on the land there, but it also means that you then end up with more salt going back down into the soil layer, affects your soil environment down into your groundwater. So it could potentially be something that is on the rise, because as we know, sea levels are rising. If we're taking more groundwater out, we're effectively allowing more of that saline environment to come into our groundwater systems or in underground. So I think it could be quite a big issue in the future, unless we carefully manage our water and the way that we're using our water.
Do you think, if you're looking at the sort of the way that we approach water, that we've compartmentalized too much, that we think about drinking water and we think about surface water and we think about groundwater?
I do, and that's my own opinion. I think that we have compartmentalized it too much, in exactly that we are thinking about each of those different parts, and we're thinking of it with quite an engineering or science mindset, that we have to cure everything. And so we look at our drinking water and we'll just treat it, and we look at our fresh water, our surface waters, and we think, right, well, we just need to sort that problem out, whereas we're not thinking about the whole water cycle as a whole, which again goes back to why I think that if we're going to have a more approach similar to Te Mana o Te Wai, then that will help in that, because we all need to talk to each other, and we need to have a good understanding of what each part plays. And in terms of where I work in the groundwater environment, I often feel like it's a bit of it's the forgotten part of when we're thinking about the environment and our water and the water cycle, even, because we think a lot about our surface water environments and how our rivers are doing, how our springs are doing, etc. But we're not tying it in that the baseline of all of these systems is the groundwater. Even in wetlands, baseline is groundwater. It's not surface water, it's groundwater. So to me, I think that we have sort of segmented everything up a bit too much, and so we now need to look and talk to each other about, what do we all know about different parts of the puzzle, as it were, and And if we include groundwater in terms of looking at protecting our freshwater resources, then I think we're in a better place in the future.
So just thinking about the research, if there's one piece of research that you would dearly love to be funded to do, what would it be?
Oh, see, that's where I'm going to be very biased though.
That's okay.
Well, to my mind, another part that's overlooked a lot of is that thing that I talked about earlier on, is that we tend to think about water in the groundwater space as being quite sterile environment, and so the processes that occur are very physical processes. But what I would really love to be able to understand more about is those biological functions that are being undertaken in our groundwater, because I think those could be key. There's lots of really important processes that are occurring. And me being a microbiologist, I'm biased, but the microbes that are under there are doing a real key linchpin role of taking some of these contaminants out and providing them into a food source that other higher organisms can feed on. And so there's a whole complex ecosystem underground that we know so little about, that plays again a pivotal role in surface water ecosystems as well. So they all again tie into each other, and that's what I'd really love to be able to do more about. Yeah, but we shall see.
That was Louise Weaver, Science Leader, Environmental Microbiology at ESR. As Louise said, decisions we make today will have a big impact on the environment that our children inherit. So understanding that we don't really know enough about groundwater and what's going on underneath the ground creates huge challenges for those of us in the sector, especially our utilities and the regional councils who are the custodians of our environment. Jeff Williams is a Senior Strategy Advisor at Wellington Water.
Whether it's proximity of wastewater treatment facilities, or just general increase in pathogen loading in the catchment, or greater use of chemicals to manage pest plants and animals in the catchment that works its way through the surface water systems and then makes its way into the groundwater systems. These are all just ongoing examples of intensification, I think, and there's no one area I think that's the cause of all of our problems. They're all different and they all need quite specific attention. This really kind of talks quite nicely to mana o te wai, and in terms of we really need to put I guess water first. Otherwise, what we're doing is putting at risk people and the economies.
So just going back to the sort of the wastewater treatment side of things, I mean, for some of us, we can think about the big wastewater treatment plants that we can see. If you're in Wellington, there's one at Seaview, but presumably you're also talking about the more household. There might be the septic tank that could be impacting the environment and the groundwater.
Yeah, absolutely. And these systems, the more we have them in the groundwater catchment areas, the more they just tend to result in a cumulative kind of death by thousand cuts impact on water quality. It's particularly challenging because any one of these activities might not be particularly significant, and this, I guess, is one of the big challenges with the Resource Management Act, is dealing with those kind of incremental impacts where each one might not be particularly significant on its own, but when you add them up as a whole, all of a sudden you've got nitrate contamination in your aquifer, for example.
And one of the things, I was talking earlier today with Louise Weaver, and she was talking about how it's not what you do today that impacts groundwater today, it's what happened in times gone past that is impacting what we are seeing in terms of groundwater today.
Very much so, and it's the choices we make in terms of the activities that we allow that sets the scene for the risk profile, and those risks might not materialize for a long time, and by then you're quite right, it might be too late. So and I guess that's one of the really big challenges is to try and get that source protection balance against community growth, kind of balance in proportion, and yeah, it's actually quite a big professional judgment challenge, to be honest. I think on one hand you need to be able to support the economy to do what it needs to do, and then on the other hand you kind of need to be looking at the consequences of your judgments being wrong. Yep. And they can be quite significant when it comes to groundwater quality, particularly. Yeah.
And I guess one of the things that we perhaps all of us battle with, and it probably is the same regardless of what profession we're talking about, but of how it's really important to get good information and to be able to have a conversation with the public such that they understand the nuances and they understand the professional judgments that are required.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think one of the really challenging areas in that aspect is a bit of a tendency to actually think that we possibly know more than we do know. I think it's something I've certainly seen. In fact, from my own point of view, with our own Wellington experience in terms of the contamination we experienced with the Waipatu Aquifer back in late 2016. We thought we had a safe, secure groundwater source. We thought it was confined, and we thought it was, we were quite happy to talk to that narrative. And it turned out to be wrong. We ended up with contamination that actually just couldn't have been possible given the conceptual geological understanding that we had at the time. So we had to completely reassess how we saw the groundwater risks for the Hutt Valley and for the wider Wellington region. And this isn't unique to us too, of course. This was, I guess, one of the conclusions of the Havelock North inquiry came through in the stage 2 report, in terms of needing to consider groundwater. It is essentially a dynamic thing. How you see it now might not necessarily be how it is in the future. So you can sort of fall into the trap of using the past to predict the future, and all sorts of things, earthquakes and lots of other things can result in the physical properties of aquifers changing, resulting in different flow paths and different contaminant risk profiles. So I guess it really forces us into trying to understand the risks rather than, I guess, trying to tick a compliance box.
I think one of the things from memory, one of the principles about safe drinking water is that change is what precedes an event, and that it would be nice to think everything's nice and static, but as you mentioned an earthquake, or you mentioned I guess the potential of a flood. All of those things are things that can have an impact on what we know today about groundwater in a particular region.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, lots of activities that go on too result in kind of physical disturbance to the ground one way or another, whether it's drilling a nearby bore, or whether it's decommissioning another bore, or whether it's drilling a pile for a building, or excavating a pit for a quarry. These things happen kind of all the time in the bigger picture sense, and they all pose threats. And this is where it really comes down to, I think, you can't just apply a tick box exercise to this sort of activity. These sorts of activities, it's the consequence of kind of getting it wrong are just so severe that it really requires, well, I guess coming back to your 6 principles, it's a high standard of care. I mean, I guess there's nothing really new there, is there? But what does that actually, what does that actually mean? What is a high standard of care? And Yeah, I think there's a bit of a variable interpretation of that, to be honest. Some are excellent. Mm.
So I guess if you're thinking about what colleagues in the sector, and if we think about the New Zealand water services sector, we know it's got to grow. We know that we have to improve the infrastructure, and we're likely to grow as an economy and grow as a country. What would be the message that you would be thinking about for the workforce in terms of expertise and understanding?
I think it's really raising the bar. I think it's that whole concept of really trying to balance the time and effort and money that goes into assessing the impacts of intensification and all of the activities that go along with it, just general urbanisation. Assessing the consequences of that, or the costs of that against the consequences of kind of getting it wrong. And I think when you think about it like that, it's not hard to, hand on heart, justify a really high bar in terms of the level of assessment that the water professionals put into this. So I guess that's the whole, that speaks to the I guess the first principle in terms of standard of care, and I guess the second principle of safe drinking water being that protection of source water is paramount. So that's that, if we just held those two alone up high, then I think that's really the message that I think I'd like to get out there. And as I say, there is really some excellent work being done, no doubt about that, and there's also some variable quality work being done, if I'm honest. So yeah.
So I guess one of the pieces that as someone who's relatively new to the sector, there is a lot to get your head around, as a member of the public, in terms of the quality of water, and understanding what we as individuals can do to make positive changes in terms of groundwater. Are there particular things that you would say to mum and dad in the street, what you should be thinking about when it comes to groundwater?
Just realizing that water's all connected. It's we sort of artificially divide it into sort of surface water and groundwater and water cycles and all sorts of things, but really it's all just water, and tipping things down the drain has consequences. I mean, that's maybe a slightly trivial example, but if you think about the fact that when you're inside a catchment, the water flows from one end to the other, whether it's through natural processes or urban water processes, and it all ends up in the same place. So just, I guess, the connectedness of it all is something.
And I think maybe one of the things that for many of us, we don't appreciate that how we get water when we fill a glass from the tap, about that's ultimately come from groundwater, and what does groundwater actually mean? Because we can see a reservoir or we can see a tank, but you can't see a river that's under the ground that's supplying an aquifer.
Absolutely. And you get such a variable understanding of what aquifers are. So some people sort of imagine them as like an underground water tanks. Some people sort of see them as maybe a bit closer to what they are, being sort of wet gravels, and then others kind of maybe you think a little bit more about how they're kind of laid down in the first place, and that they're essentially gravel deposits laid down by river systems from the past. And we all can see what happens with rivers. They sort of meander across valleys and lay down different pathways of different permeability gravels as they go, and and that's the same under the ground as well. So, in a sense, I guess that the reality of it is that under the ground we've got a hugely complicated network of flow pathways that at best we understand quite poorly, and even if you look at the Hutt aquifer system here in Wellington, the prior to the contamination in 2016, so now and prior, it was one of the most studied aquifer systems in the country. We had literally thousands of bore logs, complicated hydrogeological models, and then still we got caught out with not realizing how the thing actually worked. So look, I think hugely complicated systems, not to be underestimated.
One of the pieces that helped me begin to understand how different surface water and groundwater, is just when someone says, how long does it take water that's in the groundwater to go from Upper Hutt to the harbour relative to water that you might see in the Hutt River? And the speed at which they travel is grossly different, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It could be a decade or more before it gets to the sea, when it goes through the groundwater system, and it's within 24 hours otherwise if it goes through the river system. So and then within that, if you look at the groundwater system, you've got quite a huge range of variability across the systems as you go through these pathways of greater or lesser transmissivity. So it's hard to describe it in any way other than extremely complicated, which makes it challenging, to be honest. Quite an interesting area to work in, but also really does increase that risk of kind of falling into that trap of kind of thinking we know a little bit more than we actually know. Yeah.
Do you think one of the pieces in terms of with the national policy statement on freshwater management and Te Mana o Te Wai, that's going to, and obviously with its requirement under the Water Services Act that everybody with a duty or a power or a function needs to give effect to Te Mana o Te Wai, that's going to result in better conversations across the community, across the sector?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think the concepts of Te Mana o Te Wai in terms of the hierarchy is extremely sound for in a source water protection context. Quite literally, if you don't look after the water first, you are putting at risk people and the economy. So you have to get that right first before you can provide for people and the economy. So and I think there's quite I think there's very good conversations happening at the moment in terms of the NES drinking water consultation, and obvious tensions between that and NPS urban development, for example. So almost at whichever scale you look at the challenge, whether it's one aquifer system here or if it's source protection in general across New Zealand, I think it's all sort of heading in the same direction, which is great to see, to be honest. But yeah, some excellent conversations coming out of NES drinking water.
That was Jeff Williams, a senior strategy advisor at Wellington Water. Of course, these challenges go well beyond our shores at Aotearoa. All over the world, groundwater is a vital resource that provides almost half of all of our drinking water worldwide. About 40% of water for irrigated agriculture and about a third of the water required for industry. Koos Verix is the chair of the governing board of the United Nations International Groundwater Resources Assessment Centre, which is based in the Netherlands.
99% of all the fresh water that is not frozen, almost all, is groundwater. And then you start realizing that, this is really an important thing and an issue. And yeah, the water supply is worldwide is largely dependent on groundwater. Agriculture and irrigation are dependent on groundwater. So the control mechanisms for our whole freshwater system, and they are also at risk. They are overused. We don't know very well whether they're where they are and how they are used, but in general at the moment they are overused, depleted, and yeah, they're getting polluted by all kinds of substances, pesticides from agriculture, chemicals from all kinds of processes, and yeah, that the groundwater is also at risk. And when you realize how important that is for the freshwater world, it's clear that yeah, the situation of groundwater is alarming, at least. And yeah, we still try to identify how bad it is, but it's clear that we have to take action over there.
So with the with all the problems around the pollution and contamination, you know, and even in some parts of the world, increased salinity, both from sea level rise, but also intensive agriculture. Are you optimistic that we can address the decline in quality of groundwater?
Yeah, from nature, I'm optimistic, and we always find technical solutions, but that is not the perfect solution, and it's sometimes shifting the problem to something else. Yeah, the problem with groundwater is that processes in the underground are very slow. And that has an advantage. That means that water is being treated deep down in the earth. You have a large stock of groundwater that you can take use of. But yeah, when something is changing in that big mass of groundwater, it is very difficult to turn the process around. And now that's the same with pollution. At the moment, yeah, you really start discovering contamination in your groundwater, you do have a big problem, because you cannot simply get it all out and treat it and so on. So yeah, from that point of view, yeah, you have a problem with groundwater, and that means, yeah, you really have to take preventive action before you see the effects coming to you. It's the same with the pollution of the oceans.
Yeah. And I guess the difficulty, you know, you said, and I completely agree, that groundwater is invisible. And in fact, a lot of the water environment, in terms of the pipes that you know, convey drinking water to us or take wastewater away from us, are invisible. And that is often a problem in terms of alerting the public to a need to do something different. So in this period, which I think the United Nations talks about it as a decade of change, we've got to alert people for the need for change without them yet really understanding what groundwater is. Absolutely,
yes. And yeah, it's very interesting. I was very closely involved in the sanitation problems some 15 years ago. And it was exactly the same. We had an international year of sanitation in 2007. And at that moment, nobody was interested in sanitation. There was a sort of taboo even on the issue. Nobody wanted to talk about it, certainly not in African states. And so we started campaigning, we started promoting action, advocacy to solve the problems. And yeah, you see that the problems still exist. And at the moment, you can also see, and that's a good thing, that we're moving forward. We have connections, and that's going well. At the same time, the world's population is growing at the wrong parts of the world. In fact, the number of people without sanitization is still very high. And yeah, that's but at least this taboo is gone now, and it takes you 15 years when you talk about awareness before you people start understanding and talk by themselves about this issue. And for groundwater, it's the same. And in fact, we're starting now, let's say now, World Water Day, on groundwater advocacy, creating awareness, teaching people what's going on, how important it is. But before that reaches everybody in the world, and via the people, via NGOs, comes up to the politicians, you're quite far away. And in the SDGs, groundwater is mentioned, but not more than that. And we have nothing. So it certainly will take more time than this decade you mentioned. Then again, we talk about long-term processes. So that's quite a challenge. But if you don't start now, the solution will also move away from you.
Totally, and which I think probably nicely brings us into the need to think about climate change and how groundwater will play an important role in adapting to climate change. Or maybe it's the actual that climate change will play a big role in terms of impacting groundwater.
Yeah, now for a water person, the first remark I have to make about climate change, the basic problems in water management are independent from climate change. Floods and droughts, we've always had them. And it has to do with those problems with mismanagement, lack of spatial planning, no maintenance, overpopulation, governance things. And that's where your first action has to take place. Pollution in freshwater, pollution in groundwater, you have to stop that by regulations, by taking action. It's not directly related to climate change. Climate change, of course, is exacerbating certain processes, especially with floods and drought and so on. And so it is related, but keep in mind that the basics are very deep in the water management already. And you have to start there, prevention, precaution, and that sort of things. And climate change only makes it more urgent to do so. But the interesting thing in terms of climate change is that groundwater is a sort of buffer that you can use, and that gives you some extra water when you need it. And it gives you a place to store the water when you certainly don't want to have it. And I think, that's one very interesting aspect of water and climate.
The concept of a buffer, it feels comforting, doesn't it? And so when you then start to appreciate that the buffer may be being impacted by pollution or over allocation, you suddenly, that blanket of comfort, it starts shrinking, doesn't it?
But at the same time, you have to think about measures, moving people to another use of water, water reuse, trying to find other solutions so that you don't have to use this buffer every month, and so it's again about behavior. It's about the general management of those aquifers, and there at least you have to start, I think.
I think your point about water management and needing to recognize that it is an important thing to get right to begin with, and then having the layer of climate change is so right. In New Zealand,
exactly.
Not everybody has a water meter. maybe Auckland, absolutely everybody in Auckland, and there's another of our larger cities which have meters, but in Wellington I don't have a meter. And so one of the pieces in terms of the overall water management is to get the public to think about how much water we use and being alert to how much we use.
In fact, New Zealand and the Netherlands, I think, are quite similar in the water situation. I think we were always used to an abundance of water, trying to get rid of it. And now we're confronted with shortages and new problems. And what you described about these water meters, we had that, I don't know how long ago, but a couple of decades ago also in Amsterdam. And yeah, people, when they think water is free, that is the whole discussion also about human rights of water. Okay, they use it and without any limits, without any restrictions for themselves, and so yeah, you need a pricing mechanism to make people aware that water has now an economic value, has a price, and certainly when you want to keep it clean, and then you can convince people that they have to behave differently.
Yeah.
And it's not only from an environmental thinking that they will switch. So we use that sort of mechanisms.
Yeah. I think information is such an important part, isn't it, in terms of being able to change behavior and being able to have data around your consumption and to have a better understanding of the value of water and to appreciate that water is we say a tonga, a treasure, is a really important part of moving forward, I think. Talking about the change in the Netherlands in terms of a couple of decades ago around meters, what else is happening in terms of changing attitudes or to make people aware that you shouldn't take groundwater resources for granted?
Yeah, it's interesting. We in the Netherlands and the whole world has that idea of the Netherlands. We are the country of water, the country of the windmills and the floods and the beautiful delta works protecting the Netherlands. And we like that image, and everybody has the feeling we're the best in the world. And then a couple of years ago, the OECD did a study to what was going on in the Netherlands, and they completely turned that picture around. And then you can see that zero risk doesn't exist. We're also at risk. Look at sea level rise issues. Now, we don't know how much, but something is going to happen. And everybody in the Netherlands feels safe. It's incredible for the government, and sometimes very nice. People trust the Dutch governments, and they're convinced nothing can happen to us. And now that's really not the case. Something can happen. It can always be worse, and that's what we see now with this excessive rainfall. You have this sort of cloud bursts, and in Europe we had something last summer, also in the Netherlands, where totally unexpected and never seen before. We have an enormous amount of water that cannot get away from even the hilly country parts of the country, and yeah, you have to prepare for that. So be prepared for that, and the only thing to convince people is to show them what's going on, to give them information, and yeah, we have all kinds of tried nice instruments. Put in your postal code in internet, and you can see how high the water level can come.
So in terms of, it sounds as though for you and maybe for the Netherlands that there is a need to raise awareness of water in general and then be able to have a conversation about the groundwater and how it can impact or be impacted by everything else that's going on. Yes,
and then it's interesting, because some things are not recognized as problems. I talked about sanitation. when we did the international sanitation, nobody understood in the Netherlands. Everything was arranged. We had toilets, and the water was treated. And what's this? We even had to struggle to get the word into a dictionary. The best Dutch dictionary we had doesn't exist. Sanitation, sanitatie. So yes, there are a lot of, let's say, different possibilities and parts in water management. But yeah, it seems to be an important factor in life. Water safety, security, and yeah, we need to build up a management system. You need to have an organization that is taking care of these things. And yeah, government is not always easy. And in the Netherlands, we have a nice system already, some 800 years old, with our water boards, simply based on the system. You all imagine 800 years ago, floods in a muddy area in the coastal zone of the Netherlands. And then people sit together and they have a common interest, protection against the water. And yeah, then they have to sit together to pay, to build a little dike. And when you pay, you have also some voice in what's going to happen. Now that system still exists in the Netherlands. And that means, for instance, that we have still a separate line of financing for water problems in the Netherlands. That's money that's being collected by in the Netherlands some 20 water boards, and it can only be used for water management issues. And whatever happens in the Netherlands, COVID, healthcare, this water is this system, financial system, is staying alive. And we even have a Delta fund, a special fund, looking forward on what can come in times of climate change. And that's so we are putting money apart and then collecting it and then piling it up to be able to take measures when it's necessary later on.
It's interesting, the separation of funds for particular water investment, because we all know that whether it's a household budget or whether it's a council budget, that there are always pressures, aren't there, in terms of what needs to be done. And by keeping the funds to one side to be just focusing on water infrastructure and the water needs, these water boards that have been in existence for 800 years have managed to keep a focus and to keep investing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because let's say 20 years ago, when we didn't think about climate change and so on, and everybody was happy and with dry feet in the Netherlands, and the water was clean. Then people start now trying to start discussing this system. Nowadays, it's not a problem again because everybody realizes what's going on, and you can see with other things in that are invisible. For instance, drainage systems in big cities. They are all I don't know, 100 years old, 80 years old. And slowly falling apart, and nobody feels that they own this problem, and nobody made any reservation to take measures. And someday we will have a big problem there. And again, you have to look ahead with your water problems, and that everybody is prepared to do that. But at the moment, it will cost money. Yeah, you have to be really convincing, and that's still difficult.
Koos Verrix, Chair of the Governing Board of the United Nations International Groundwater Resources Assessment Centre, based in the Netherlands. Our thanks to the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands for their assistance in facilitating this discussion. The Netherlands is at the forefront of solutions to many water issues and is very proactive in providing support globally, including to us in Tāwara. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this an interesting and informative discussion. Please keep an eye on our website and social media for further episodes of Tāwara or Te Wai Water Talk. Ngā mihi nui.